Assalamu alaikum. Today you will learn about application context in Spring Framework. Before moving on to any of the further topics, please be informed that this is the second tutorial in the series. So if you have not gone through the previous tutorial, please go through that tutorial first and then continue with this one. So without any further ado, let's get started. So I have opened up my IntelliJ over here. Let's go to new project. We will be building a Maven project. So in the left section, I would go for Maven archetype. And let's name our project as Spring Demo. And in the archetype section, we have to search for Maven archetype quick start. What this do is it will create a basic project structure for your application. So let's click on start. As you can see, the Maven is downloading the dependencies from the remote server and our project build is complete. So guys, if you don't know what Maven is, Maven in a nutshell is a building tool that is used to create project, and how this works is it will download all the dependencies or jars that your project needs from the remote server into your machine. So how this works is it has a file called pom.xml, which is a XML file, and in this you have to specify what dependencies or what jars that you have to download, and it will download it for you. So for example, in the dependencies section, you have one dependency already present in this, which is GeoUnit used for testing, which Maven has already provided for us. Similarly, if we want any other dependency, we can just add it over here. So let's check our project structure. We have project inside src main Java package. We have our application over here. So let's try to run this application. I will do a right click and run. As you can see, the application is working fine. So if you have been following, in the last tutorial, I have explained you that Spring is famous for removing dependencies, and it does that by creating objects or beans inside a Spring container. So let's try to understand how we can avoid creating new objects by ourselves and assign the Spring framework to create the objects for us rather than we creating the objects. So I will delete this line over here, and in the main package, I will create two classes. Let's name this class as car. Inside this, I will have one method over here which says public void engine, and in this I will say car engine. So in the main application, if we want to call this method, so what we need to do is, first of all, we need to create the object of car class. Car equals new car. And from here we can call the method dot engine, which is simple Java. Let's run this. Here you can see the method has been called. Now instead of car, if I want a different vehicle, suppose this time I need a bike. So what should I do? I will create another class for this. Create a class. Let's name this class as bike. And inside this also I will have a similar method. Let me just copy this, and in here what I'll do, I'll paste it over here. And instead of car, this time I'll say bike engine. Similarly, here in the main class, if I need to call the engine method of the bike class, how would I do that? Simple, create the bike object. Bike is equals to new bike, and in here bike dot engine. I will comment this part over here and right click run. This time we got bike engine. But now don't you think every time we have to change our vehicle, we have to change this code as well? Like from car, if we want to go with bike, then we have to change the code as well, which is not good because this is a tight coupling. But we want loose coupling so that the dependency is reduced. So how can we do that? Well, we can create a new interface over here. I will name this as vehicle, and inside this I am going to have a method called engine, and in the car class I am going to implement this interface, implement vehicle, and this we need to override. Alright. Similarly, we can do this in the bike class as well. Implements vehicle, and we will override this. And in the main class, what I'm going to do is, let me just comment this part out. And here I'll create a new object of vehicle. New car. And so now you can see that we have removed the dependency. Instead of writing car or bike each time, we have created an interface which says vehicle and implemented that interface in these two classes, which are car class and bike class. So let's run this first. And we got car engine. Why? Because it is returning a car object over here. So as you can see, from writing the class name each time for our object, we just need to mention the interface name, and what kind of object we want, we can simply mention it over the right hand side. So this has removed a little bit of dependency. Why? Because on the left side we don't have to change everything each time, but on the right side we have to change. For example, next time if we want a bike object, we still have to make changes in our code. Run this. This time we got bike engine. So as you can see, we have not completely reduced the dependency. In fact, this is just an example of polymorphism because we have one interface and many implementation over here. So let's try to remove the dependency on the right hand side as well. How can we do that? We can do that with the help of Spring framework. Up till now, our project has not used Spring at all anywhere. So in order to use Spring, we need to have some dependencies. We need to have some jars. So where do we need to put that jars? Simple. Since we are using Maven build tool, we just need to mention the name of the dependency over here, and Maven will take care of rest of the things. It will take care of downloading the dependency from the remote server into our machine. So what is the name of the dependency for Spring Framework? We need to go to MVN repository, and here I will search for Spring Context. That's the dependency, the first one in the search result. You can pick any dependency. I'll go for 6.2.7 and just copy this dependency and paste it right over here and update our pom.xml file. Now let me just comment this as well. So here, in order to remove the dependency on both the sides, what I'll do is I'll create a new object of an interface called ApplicationContext. Import this. This is provided by Spring Framework. I'll name this as context is equals to new class path XML application context. Right? And so let me just complete this and then I'll explain what does this do. And in here I'll say context dot get bean. So what I've done over here is I've created an object of an interface called ApplicationContext. This context will provide us with the object that we need. For example, whether we need a bike object or we need a car object, and so on and so forth. And as you know, in Spring Framework, the objects that Spring Container provides, these objects are called beans. So context will return some bean. That bean can be a bike bean or a car bean. But we need to tell the Spring Framework which bean we require. So how do we do that? If you have been following my tutorials, I have already explained there is a configuration file, and based on this configuration file, Spring Container produces the beans and returns it to the user. So this is what we are going to do over here. And I already have explained that this configuration file can be a Java file or an XML file. For now, we are going to create an XML file for this. So let's get back to our editor. So I'll right click over here and create a new directory called resources. Inside resources, I'm going to create a new XML file, which will be our configuration file. config.xml. Now in this, what we need to do? We need to provide the Spring Framework that what kinds of beans we want. So in other words, we have to specify the definition of these beans. How do we do that? Let's go to Google and search for Spring XML configuration. This will take you to the Spring documentation website. And if you scroll a little bit down over here, you can see XML schema based configuration. So this is what we were looking for. Let's copy this and paste it right in our XML file. This is the bean definition. As you can see, these are the tags for beans, and inside these beans tag, we can mention as many bean as we want. So I will create a bean over here, bean, and every bean has an ID. The ID for this bean, we are going to give it as vehicle because we are working with vehicle, and we have to specify the class of it. So here we have to mention what object we want this bean to return. If we want a car object or we want a bike object. Suppose for now we want a car object. So we have to mention the car class with its complete package, which is org.example.car, and close the bean tag. Now let's go back to our application file, and in here we have to provide the name of our configuration file, which is config.xml. Now that we got hold of our configuration file, in the context object, we just have to mention what bean we want. Since we only have one bean in our configuration file, we want that for now, which is vehicle. Note that the name of the bean here and the bean ID here should be exactly same. And once that we got the object, we can store it inside a vehicle object and call the method. Now we also have to typecast this into vehicle, right? So let's now run this and see what happens. We got an output car engine, but how is it working? Let's understand how. So in our main method, first we created car object and got the engine of the car, but we changed our mind and we created bike object and we got the engine of the bike. But then we realized we are making a lot of changes in our code and will lead to tight coupling. So what we did, we made the left hand side constant and we only changed the right hand side of our expression, which is somewhat convenience because we don't have to change the left hand side every time, but we still had to change the right hand side. In order to completely make it a loosely coupled application, we used Spring Framework. Spring Framework provides interface called ApplicationContext. But what is this application context? Now this application context is a representation of your Spring container or IoC container, which I have already explained you in the previous tutorial. So what it does is it creates the beans based on the predefined configuration, and it configures the beans, wire them together, and returns it to the developer whenever the developer needs it. This configuration file we have already created. Let's understand the flow of our application. So I have created an object of Spring context over here, and in this I have passed the configuration file, which, as you know, the Spring needs it, this configuration file, to create the beans. So we have passed the configuration file over here. What does this configuration file looks like? This is nothing but an XML file which has bean definition, and inside these beans we can create multiple bean. This configuration will determine what type of object this bean will return. For example, this bean with this ID will return an object of car. So once it has returned any object, it will be stored in this context object. And from this context object, we can get that bean with the help of a bean ID. In this case, it was vehicle. So we asked the context to get us a bean of ID vehicle. Once we got the bean, we stored it in an object. And with that object, we called the method. As simple as that. Now, what happens instead of car engine if we need a bike engine? If you have guessed it correctly, we can just simply change the class over here. Instead of car, we say bike. And it will return you an object of bike as expected. But you may ask, what is the difference? Previously we were changing the code over here and over here, and now we have to make changes in the XML file. How is that any different? Well, the difference is that we don't have to touch anything in our code. The Java file remains intact. We just have to change the things that we want in our XML file only, which is a very minor change. Now this is a very small application, but this is a demonstration how would it look like in an enterprise level application. Suppose in enterprise level application there are 100 lines of code over here there, and we don't want to touch anything in our already working code. So what we do, we use Spring Framework and we create a configuration file, XML file, and we make small changes over there so that we only have to change in our XML file. Our Java code remains intact. What this will do? This will remove the dependency of one component over the other, thereby making the project loosely coupled. Hence it will be easy to add or remove different components from the project, and it will be easy for testing as well. Now your homework would be to create a similar project, and instead of having vehicle, I need cake, which can be vanilla cake or chocolate cake. So how would you do that? Let me give you a hint. Just like creating these car or bike classes, you will create vanilla or chocolate classes. And instead of having vehicle interface, you will have cake interface, which will be implemented by previous two classes. So I hope you should be able to do that. And in the next lecture, you shall learn about dependency injection in Spring Framework. So see you guys next time.